Well, I'm going to ask you to participate in a little case study with me. This was presented to a group of graduate-level nursing students. They were taking a class called The Psychological Aspects of Aging, okay? And their professor said, I want you to listen to this little case study and think about how you would feel, the emotions that might come up in you if this was your patient. So that's what I want you to do. You pretend like you're in the class, you're a nursing student, and you hear this and think about how would I feel? How do I feel if this was my patient? Class is The Psychological Aspects of Aging. Here we go. The patient neither speaks nor comprehends the spoken word. Sometimes she babbles incoherently for hours on end. She's disoriented about person, place, and time. She does, however, respond to her own name. I've worked with her for the past 6 months, but she still shows complete disregard for her physical appearance and makes no effort to assist in her own care. She must be fed, bathed, and clothed by others. Because she has no teeth, her food must be pureed. Her shirt is usually soiled from almost incessant drooling. She does not walk. Her sleep pattern is erratic. Often she wakes in the middle of the night, and her screaming awakens others. Most of the time, she's friendly and happy, but several times a day, she gets quite agitated without apparent cause. So we asked them what kind of emotions they would have. You maybe think about that a little bit yourself. How would you feel? And the students began to say things like frustrated, kind of hopeless, helpless, a little bit despairing, sad. And then the professor said, well, I rather enjoy working with this patient, and showed him a picture that looked kind of like this. Not me. There we go. He said, this is the patient. That's our little guy, Eli, when he was 4 months old. He's 4.5 now. We have a 9-year-old girl and also a little 22-month-old girl, so we've got 3 kids. But I love that illustration because I think that it can kind of show us how much our perspective of something, what we perceive something to be, affects us. It affects our viewpoint, our mindset, our opinion about it, our perception. And these couple of moments that I have with you, we're going to talk about our perception and hopefully get a new perspective on aging, older adult ministry, what it means to get older in our country, specifically what it means to engage people who are in the second half of life in significant kingdom work. This is not a message for you guys that have congregations. Or maybe I should say it like this. This is not a message just for you all who have congregations full of people who are in that age category. This is not a message for you who are sitting out here and are 60, 70, or 80. This is not a message specifically targeted to like a certain group. This affects all of us. If you're 25, this affects you. It affects you and your family. It affects the people you minister with and you serve. If you are 55 yourself, this affects you. If you are serving in a local church, this affects you. This is affecting all of us, every community, every church, every state, every corner of our world. This is affecting us because never before have so many people lived for so long with so much health and vitality and energy and the capacity to give. God is raising up an army right now at this moment in history of people who are in the second half of life, I believe, to do significant work for Christ and his mission on this earth. And this is the kind of thing that fires me up. This has been my ministry, my calling, my whole adult life. This is what I've been doing for 20 plus years now because I believe this is kind of where it's at. I believe God is up to something. And so I was 19 years old in a Christian college and began to call churches across the country saying, would you take a senior adult intern, in the summer? And I'm 19 and they're like, what? We've never heard of this. And I had people saying, really with your gifts, you should invest that in children or in women's ministry. And, why would you want to work with older people? But God kind of put this flame in my heart. And I continue to follow that calling. And that's just taken me to serving in a local church for several years in Las Vegas as their minister with older adults. More recently, the past 10, 12 years, my family and I have lived back more in the Midwest where our roots are. We live in Iowa right now. And I have spent the majority of my time trying to speak with churches and pastors and older adults themselves to wake them up to the reality of what's happening in our country among older adults. You know, like I said, I think God is up to something big, and I don't want to miss it. And I don't want the stereotypes that exist or our wrong perceptions to keep us from realizing all the potential that God is wanting to unleash among this generation. And so we're going to talk about 3 new perspectives that I think we have to have, kind of a fresh mindset. And I hope you'll come at it with that you'll say, okay, I'm going to try to look at this different, at least for this 30 minutes or so. So what are those new perspectives? The first one is we've got to get a new perspective on who it is we're talking about. Who are we really talking about? Chances are, when Mike said senior adults, or you saw what I was going to talk about, something popped up in your head. Often, when someone talks to me and they say, oh, what do you do? Oh, I work in this whole area of older adult ministry, I'll get a response like this. Well, I used to visit in a nursing home once, Amy. And it always takes me back, because I think, man, what a short-sighted view we have of what it means to move into this second half of life in our culture. Even last night at the Pi Fellowship, I was sitting at a table getting acquainted with some of you all, and what do you do? I said, and he said, the gentleman said to me, what exactly do you mean by older adult? As he was sitting there with some, salt and pepper gray hair. And there's these perceptions, okay? So we've got at least 3 groups here that we're dealing with. The first are those that are more that frail elderly component. And they need ministry. James and Isaiah talks about caring for the orphan and the widow. And we are to go to the marginalized. And so these are people that do have a lot of physical needs. Maybe they can't get out. They need help with transportation. They need someone to come over with visitation. They're dealing with lots of health needs, end-of-life issues, losses that they've experienced. Did you know, though, that only about 5% of the over 65 population, only 5% live in some kind of long-term care setting? The vast majority of people are living independently, taking care of their own needs, and are capable of doing so many things. But this is an important segment. So that's one drop in the bucket. Another piece is who I call the senior adult. Now, this is probably those who are at least 70 plus in age, maybe even 75 plus in age or older than that. If you are a church that has had some kind of seniors ministry, this is probably who you have targeted it towards. These are people today who are part of the builder generation. The builder generation, those that were, served in World War II, came home from the war, built our country, also talked about as the silent generation would fall under that. And they are dealing with needs too. They're beginning to navigate some health needs. They're retired. They are experiencing loss. Many are beginning to lose their spouse. They're kind of questioning, do I have purpose? What is the meaning that I can bring out of my life now at this stage in my life? But that's that slice that I would call the senior adult. And then we've got this huge group over here whom I call the new old. Now, incidentally, I am not suggesting that you take these 3 names and start putting them in your program or your newsletter. The frail elderly, we've got a program for. This is just for us to kind of understand what's going on. We've got this group called the new old, who are primarily baby boomers. And no, go way back. I'm not even close yet. Thank you. The new old are primarily baby boomers, and baby boomers were born between 1946 to 1964. That makes the oldest baby boomer this year 68 years old. There are 78 million boomers. They are a huge group. who are bursting on the scene as they're moving into this season of life. And the boomers, as they have moved through life, they have changed everything. I mean, we needed more schools when they started school. And then there needed to be more jobs when we started jobs, when they needed to work. And now they're moving into the retirement season and everyone's scrambling. What do we do? How do we reach these people? People in the retail industry. Chico's women's clothing store. Do you have that in New Mexico? Yeah. They are investing tons of money, sitting around boardroom tables, strategizing, talking about this age demographic. CVS Pharmacy is doing the exact same thing. There are people out there researching our stoplights, and if we need to start changing them at a slower rate to accommodate the growing amount of older drivers. I'm just saying all this because everybody else is talking about this. Where's the church? Where are we in this conversation? If we care about souls, we care about so much more than getting their dollar at our store. We care about their soul and their eternity and living their life for Christ. And we've got to start engaging in these kinds of conversations in our churches. Because these are people that matter to God, and they should matter to us. Now, the baby boomer generation, they're facing some serious stuff. Many of them are caring for aging parents. They've got adult children with needs. They're wanting to know how to be good grandparents. They're wrestling with the fact that they've maybe leaving that corporate job that they've had, and do I matter now? What is my purpose at this point? So they've got all these needs that are going on, and they're also approaching aging really differently. For one thing, they do not like the word senior. Have any of you run into that yet? The front page of our paper where I live, the Omaha World Herald, had a spread on boomers don't like the word senior. So, we're going to have to revamp that. They are technologically savvy. Until very recently, boomers were the number one users of Facebook, more than even the younger generations. So we've got a group that is not going to retire the same way. They are looking at life differently, and we've got to get kind of a new perspective on who we're talking about and who we're going to reach. Now, the second new perspective is we've got to have a new perspective on our mission. Now, that's what this conference is about, right? Evangelism. And you know our mission, Matthew chapter 28, the Great Commission, helping people find their way back to God, seeking and saving the lost. That's our mission. But I think you need to do a serious check inside yourself and say, how long ago did we really focus and talk about this mission as it related to people who were 60 or 70 or 80 years old? Sometimes when we think about ministry with older adults, we think about fellowship and socials and a bus trip to go and see something. And really, if you look at the history, 30 years ago when senior adult ministry came on the scene, that was the focus of it. It was to kind of help these people to have a place where they could be in relationship and combat loneliness. And that's okay. Like most things in the church, the pendulum swings around. But the pendulum has swung way too far over there. And it's affecting a lot of things. It breeds a selfishness among an older adult that, even the people at church are telling me I should sit back and take it easy and just enjoy fun stuff, so maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. It communicates to a younger generation that when they get older, life is about just having fun, going on trips and just coasting. That's not the message we want to give. So we've got to bring this pendulum back here and say, hey, these are people with real needs and real life issues. The CDC, Center for Disease Control, they put out a report 2 years ago that said the number one group that binge drinks the most are people over 65. Just last week, I read that the divorce rate for Americans over 50 doubled between 1990 and 2010. There's all kinds of talk about the gray divorce. Our secular culture is even encouraging it, saying, hey, you're going to live longer? You're going to live 30 more years? Are you sure that's who you want to spend your life with now? Guys, these are people with real issues, real hurts, real stuff going on in their lives. We can't just throw them a luncheon. And not that there's anything wrong with a luncheon, you hear me, but just throw them a luncheon and say, that's all you need when you get to be that age. Here's the thing. A simple statement you know, but we got to take it in. Not everybody who's over 50 or 55 is a Christ follower. They're not. And that number is declining as we go down generations. The boomers are less than the builders. Also, just because someone has sat in church on the back row does not mean what they've taken into their head has really gone down and transformed their heart and their life. People need to find their way back to God and to know that there is an answer in Him no matter what their age is. We've thrown around statistics for a long time that, if you don't reach somebody by the time they're 18 or whatever the number is, then their chances of coming to Christ are really small. And so we've used that to invest in children's ministry and youth ministry. And thank goodness. I've benefited from it. My children are benefiting from it. But this is not an either-or discussion. This is a both and. And I think that if we were to invest the same amount of staff and strategy and time and money into reaching a lost group of people who are over the age of 50, would we not see a harvest? When Jesus talks in Matthew chapter 9 about the harvest being plentiful, I think it speaks to this age group in many ways. George Barna, he wrote something, it's been several years ago now, that one of the most receptive groups to the gospel were people over the age of 50. And I think that's still true today for several reasons. One is they are dealing with so many life changes, so many crises. If you've ever seen the social readjustment scale or a stress test, you can go Google that if you want to. It was developed quite some time ago by sociologists, and it lists all these items that you're supposed to go off and check how many of those things have happened to you within the past year, and then it spits out a score, kind of how much stress is in your life and kind of what your risk is of illness and stuff. But if you look at that list with the mindset of, how many of these could be happening in somebody's life who's in this second half? There's a lot of them. Way number one with the highest point total is death of a spouse. The likelihood of that goes up as we age. Death of a close family member, retirement, death of close friends, change in work, change in residence, change in social activities, health issues. There's all kinds of things. And we know that when we go through crisis, when we go through change, people are open to matters of faith. So that's one reason they're receptive. They're receptive because they're looking for meaningful relationships. We all are. But especially at this stage in life, people have kind of dropped the pretense. They know who they are. And they are ready to just say, hey, I've got this much left of life. And I want to have relationships that count, that I can really invest in. And then the third thing is they're looking for purpose. Oh, this generation is scrambling and looking to find purpose and meaning, both Christians and non-Christians. And, we answer that. We are the only ones that can answer that true purpose comes through finding our identity in Jesus Christ. And then as we do, He gives us these places to serve. This photo here is of a man in Illinois. He's a part of a church that is inside a 55-plus living community. This is actually a large church that has multi-sites, and they planted one of their sites in this 55-plus community. And they are really seeing people find their way back to God. And the man there, Bob, he's 80 years old. And, he was invited by his friends, come play golf with us, eat with us. Then we have a small group at our house. You want to come over to our house? He starts to come. He starts to listen. He had been exposed. Many cases, these generations have been exposed to it, but they've wandered away from it. It was never, never stuck. It wasn't important to them. So he starts listening, and he hears this in a fresh way, and he eventually makes the decision, I want to be a Christ follower. He gets baptized when that's the pastor there. The pastor told me, Bob, came up out of the water, and he said to me, "All my life I've known something was missing. Now I know what it is." Now here's the thing. That is what our mission is about. But that should not be just some one isolated cool story. I mean, this should be happening over and over and over again in your churches and in your communities. It shouldn't just be kind of just, oh, that's so cool. It is cool every single time, but that should be happening lots and lots of times. And sure, there are strategies and there are methods, and I can help you with that or talk to you about what churches have been doing to reach this demographic, but it starts with us deciding we are going to make this a part of our mission. We are going to be intentional about this age group. The third perspective is we need a perspective on what it really means to mobilize these people for ministry. What does it really mean to engage people in the second half of life to make a difference for Christ and his mission? I've been in churches, visited, made observations, and too often, I might step on some toes here, but too often we have created our older adult ministry over here to kind of keep these people happy while we go over here and go about the real work of the church. Because we want to change the music style or we want to do this kind of mission. So let's just give them something over here that they can enjoy, and then we'll go about our mission. Oh, this age group needs to be critical and absolutely essential to the mission of your church. You need them as a part of your army to accomplish your purposes, not just sit over here on the sidelines. And I think there is a perfect storm brewing, if you will, a perfect equation. It looks kind of like this. We've got a whole generation of people with time. Now, I'm not saying that just because someone is retired or getting close to retirement that they have, all this time. In fact, most people will say to me, "Oh man, Amy, I'm busier now than when I was working." But they have discretionary time. Many of you have discretionary time. And time is a gift. Time is something from God. It is not to be squandered. It is not to be wasted. It's to be used for him. So we take time, a generation with time, we add to that time plus experience, life experience, work experience, crises that have happened. As you travel through life, all kinds of stuff has occurred. And when you do that and when you're willing to share that, you're doing like the Apostle Paul said in Corinthians about, God came along and comforted you. Now you comfort someone else. We should use all that experience. So time plus experience plus resources. Sometimes this is financial resources. I'm not assuming everybody that's older is wealthy. But we do walk through life where we're in a stage of accumulating. And then we need to be thinking about, how do I really invest this now? And it may be stuff. I remember a dentist who had a mother-in-law quarters on their home, and the mother-in-law had lived there when she was sick, and the mother had lived there. They had both passed away. There was a missionary going to be back on furlough and needed a place to stay, and so they invited him to be there at their home, and it went so well that they decided we're going to always use that for some ministry effort. That's a resource. It worked much better for him and his wife at that stage in their life when their kids were out of the house than it would have when they've got all these preschoolers running around and everything else. Okay? So time plus experience plus resources equals significant kingdom impact. Significant is key to me. Sometimes I'll go somewhere and I'll say, so how do you utilize your older adults here? And they'll say, well, we have a group that comes in on Tuesday morning and folds the bulletins. And I always think, that's an important task. But we all should be willing to do that, no matter what our age is. The fact that we've got this short list of jobs that we can do once we reach about 55 or 60 that include, folding bulletins, making coffee, or being an usher, man, that is a disservice. There was a guy who said, I'm getting ready to retire, and I would like to really invest time in my church, but I want to do more than be an usher. And I thought, man, what have we done that we've communicated that to people? These are people who have led companies. They have taught children. They have been in charge of projects. I mean, they can be doing things like figuring out how to stamp out homelessness in your community, or mentoring disadvantaged kids at that school where there's so much poverty, or whatever. That's the kind of missional work that we should be investing people in. But there are barriers to that. There are things that make it hard. One of those barriers is ageism. I don't know if you've heard that term, but ageism is the prejudice or the negative attitudes or biases we have about aging or getting older or older people. And ageism has crept into the church too. It shows up in different places. I'm going to pitch out some statements to you. You can answer them true or false here. A younger person could do the job better than an older person. True or false? I've led you, haven't I, a little bit? False. I mean, that's a false statement, but research proves it's false. Older adults are capable and usually bring to a work environment thoroughness, skill, less absenteeism, more experience to a task. The one place where a younger person is going to do the job better is things of high physical labor. That's just the way it is, people. Our physical bodies decline as we age. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, we became beings that were not going to live forever, and aging became a part of the process. So physical labor jobs, a young person often can do better. But most other tasks, an older person can do as well as someone that is younger. Another statement would be, older people can't learn new things. True or false? False, that's false. But you've maybe said it, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, Our brains are capable of making new connections well into the later years of our life. A third one that would go along with that is older people can't change. True or false? That's also false. But we've thought it before. Oh, she's so stuck in her ways. We'll never get her to go along with this thing that we're wanting to do. Change has more to do with our temperament, how we're wired inside, than it actually does that age that we hold. All of those things can affect us. When we believe that people can't change, or it's going to be hard for them to change, we really begin to put a limit on God, because God's all about change. That's what he does, right? He redeems, he restores, he makes new. And he can do that in someone who's 15, and he can do that in someone who's 75. He is about change. This photo here that I have is of a lady at a church who serves in the tech ministry. And this is one of those churches that's got kind of like our worship band here. They've got sound and PowerPoint and lights and just video and all this stuff, okay? So she wanted to serve in this area. Thank goodness that young worship pastor said, okay, and trained her and invested in her, and she is one of their best volunteers. Most loyal, most consistent, understands how to do the whole thing. I'm telling this story one time to a group of actual older adults, and someone from the back of the room like this, they yell out at me. They're like, hey, Amy, you know why she does that, don't you? And I was like, no, why? And they said, because then she can control the volume. I thought, well, more power to her, right? Way to go. But she could learn something new. She could invest herself here. And we need to believe that about people and let them serve. Open it up and let them serve and give of their time and talents and abilities in a variety of different places. We got to let go of those ageist attitudes that we hold. And then also we got to help our older people let go of them. Some have said and written about, researchers, that the number one thing that holds older people up from really doing stuff isn't physical limitations. It's the stereotypes that they hold about aging. They think, oh, I'm too old to do that. I should sit back and coast now. So not only do we need to change our attitudes, we've got to help them also change theirs. Now, a second barrier. Remember, I'm telling you barriers, why we have trouble really engaging these people in ministry. A second one is that we don't always have a biblical view of retirement. Retirement hasn't always been on the scene. I mean, it's a relatively new thing historically, even in our culture. People, especially the American ideal, we came here to work and to be able to work. And that was a part of kind of the makeup of the Americans, especially here. And, you know, even when retirement was introduced, people didn't like it. And it wasn't until the 50s, it wasn't really until the 50s that a major switch began to happen. And it happened because savvy business professionals figured out this could be a money-making place. So they started busing people to those Del Webb Sun Cities and showing them, see the kind of life you could live? And they, you know, advertisements would pop up. You can go to the baseball game in the middle of the week. You know, this is great. And oh, we bought it hook, line, and sinker. And then we had this period of time where we began to look forward to early retirement. And this mentality has become embedded in our culture that we should work hard and save up enough so that we can retire just as soon as we can. And there's nothing completely wrong with that. But there is something wrong with it when it also bleeds over into our Christian life. That we think we can retire from our work for the Lord. You know, the parable that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 12, you can turn there if you want to, it speaks so much to, I think, a little bit of our retirement ideal here. You know, he's telling that story, and he says, there was this rich man, around verse 16, producing a good crop, and the man thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, be merry. Isn't that what we are taught about retirement? Most advertisements on television, make sure you save enough so that you can enjoy yourself. What are the things you want to do in retirement? This is your time to focus on yourself. That is what we're fed daily. But what did God say? Verse 20, God said to him, you fool. You fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. When Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, a familiar verse, I'm sure to many of you, do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world. And retirement is a place where we have been affected by this world. Even in our churches, people will think, and sometimes we help to promote it. Hey, you know, you've paid your time. You've kind of, put in your dues. You should sit back and relax now. No, that is not what the Bible communicates. We've got to be counterculture. And there are specific ways to start thinking about doing this. If you're someone who has the opportunity to teach a Sunday school class or preach the sermon on Sunday morning or sit across the table from somebody, we've got to always be thinking, how does this text apply, whatever you're teaching from, not only to that young family or to that teenager, but how does this apply to someone who's 55 or 65? What is it saying to them about selfishness, about materialism, about whatever? We should be including illustrations and examples about things that are happening for people in that stage of life, as well as those that are happening to people in the younger stage of life. The second thing to be doing is to start drawing attention to those making significant contributions for the kingdom. Make it a regular thing that, if you can do video, that you've got this 1-minute testimony on video of the guy who goes down to the disadvantaged school every single week, maybe 3 days a week, and mentors these kids and the stories that are happening with him, and he's 65 or 70 years old. Or you write in your church newsletter a story about the couple who spent a month overseas forging business partnerships so that in that poverty-stricken area, those people would now have a business where they could earn an income for their family. Or you bring up this young person or this older person on stage and you do a little Q&A with them about the mission trip that they took. Or you start having unpaid staff on your church staff. I've seen churches that do this. Man, that person who's 65 or 70, they are given all the responsibilities. Staff meeting, the business card, the little place to work. They just don't have to take a paycheck right then. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. So we got to think about retirement differently. We've also got to rethink what kind of opportunities we're providing for people. And that's what this chart kind of shows. I want you to see this for a minute. It's changing. The new old, the baby boomers, are approaching serving in a very different way than the builder or senior adult generation. Seniors were more willing to just fill an existing need. You need me to be there? I'll be there. Boomers are like, I've got an entrepreneurial spirit. I want to know what I can uniquely bring to this issue. I think of a guy named George. He's a boomer. He's still working. He owns a mortgage company. He was on a business trip. The USA paper came to the door. On it was a whole spread about homelessness. And it just burned inside of him. And he began to think, what can I do? Long story short, he created a shelter fund. That's what he called it. Everybody that closed a loan with his company was given the opportunity to give some piece of money, if they chose, to some kind of homeless project or mission in their community. He's raised thousands of dollars this way. Now, could he have gone with his church on their once-a-month Saturday trip to the soup kitchen? Sure, he could have. But he wanted to figure out how he, uniquely with his gifting and wiring, could invest. Research shows that men especially want to know, how can I use my skills and my work experience that I used in my job for years to now make a difference for Christ, for his kingdom, for serving other people? And we need to help do that. We need to come alongside them and help them do that. Boomers definitely want a mission or a purpose. They're not just going to do it because it's your church or because you asked them to. What is this really about? They like short-term commitments. The builder generation, that senior adult generation, boy, they were willing to sign on and do it because they just were. I talked to a lady at the nursing home. She passed away now. But she's telling me, Amy, I taught the 3-year-old Sunday school class for 50 years, and I still miss it. And that is a great trait that the builder generation brings, but the boomers don't. That's not part of their wiring. We can't make them change. We've got to start thinking about, how do we create service opportunities that are short term? Several churches I've worked with are doing something called a done-in-a-day project, where they gather their older adults, second half of life people. They spend one whole Saturday in some area in their city. Maybe it's in the inner city or with a school or something like that, working, serving, doing those projects, and then they're done in a day. And that has been resonating with this new old set. Boomers also want things to be flexible because they want to be able to go see their grandkids play volleyball, or they want to be able to take a trip. So I think we're going to have to do a whole lot more of co-teaching or co-leading, so that one can be gone and the other can be gone and the other can be back. I mean, there's just a lot of changes brewing in this area that we're going to have to be sensitive to. Then the last thing that I think is a barrier and something that we are going to have to help with is just that people don't always know where to serve. They need help finding their place. Where is that unique spot that God has for me? And I'll share a few stories of people to kind of help us with this. I met a guy named Hal. Hal was 78 when I met him, and he was serving in the Houston prison systems. And I said, well, how did you get like this? And he said, well, 20 years ago or so think about, do the math, he's 55, 58 or so, he's sitting in church, and the pastor is preaching from Matthew chapter 25. When I was thirsty, he gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. And he said it just resonated with something going on in my own soul. And so I took the step, and I got trained in doing ministry there in the prison, and I began to spend every Tuesday night working with these men. And he went on to where he would help with their families. So he's telling me all of this, and then I kind of chide him a little bit, and I say, when are you going to retire? I mean, come on, you're pushing 80 here. How long are you going to do this? Oh my, he just about jumped out of his chair. He started rattling off statistics. He knew all the stats about prisons and the need in our country. And he said, Amy, there is a man 92 years old in a wheelchair who comes to the prison every week to serve these men. If he can do it, I can do it. And you know, that started. How did it start? Because he was connected to God. He listened. He heard the message. So we cannot underestimate the importance. I've heard story after story where I'll talk to someone who's serving, retired. They're retired, but they're serving. And they'll say, well, my pastor was praying for me. He kept praying, and he kept talking to me. And that's how I got involved in this place of work. So do not underestimate the power of connecting people to God and praying for them and believing God has a place for them. A second thing is to expose them to all kinds of new and different ministry opportunities. Sometimes we'll think, oh, you know, she taught school for years. We should get her in the children's ministry. And then she'll be like, no, I do not want to serve with children anymore. I want to do something different. And we need to expose them to those different things. Show them. Help them think about something they've always wanted to do but never had the chance to do yet. There was a man who was in his late 50s. He was downsized from his company. He had, good corporate job. He began to look for another job. In that process, he became exposed to the Voice of the Martyrs, persecuted church, I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And he just kind of kept going with that. He read about them. He got more acquainted with them. He began to go on some mission efforts with them, all the while thinking he was going to get another job. Nothing really came about. Time went on. Voice of the Martyrs called him and said, we would like someone to come and revamp kind of our business operations and how we interface with churches. And so he and his wife packed up, moved across the country from their grandkids and from their home to move to this small community and work for Voice of the Martyrs in their second half of life. And you know what he told me? He said, Amy, I'm making a third of what I was making before, but I'd do this for free if I could. Now that's finding that mission. Some people need help figuring out how to use their hobbies as a ministry. I'm not here to be the killjoy and say people can't have fun in retirement. But think about, how can they take their hobby and use it? And use it to invest. Who is that young boy who doesn't have a father figure? Take him on that golf trip or fishing trip or, whatever it is. I asked a couple this one time, what do you want to do when you retire? And they said, we'd like to take our RV and go to disaster sites. Whenever something happens, we'd like to be able to be there and cook or clean. That's using their hobby. Help people tap into their passion. I like Bruce Bugby's definition of passion, that passion is that God-given desire that compels us to make a difference in a particular area of ministry. That it's that thing that you just kind of pound your fist on the table and say, I can't stand this. I have to do something about it. Or you like to stay up late talking about it, or your hands get kind of sweaty when you hear about it. When you hear James Walker, talking this morning, hopefully that from observation moves to motivation and it becomes a passion. And we need to bring that out of our people, that they don't just sit back at this season of their life. Because, here's the thing. There's too much at stake. That's what I keep thinking about as I've been at the conference with you. Last night as I heard the speakers, and then this morning, there is too much at stake for our older generation to just say, I'm going to sit back and coast now. We heard it. We just heard about the state of spirituality in America. A younger generation today needs to hear how faith is real in your life. Not preached at, but told stories about how God saw you through that time when the finances were so tight, about how he walked you through that period of infertility, about how you got through this stage when you had to move all the way across the country from your family. That's what a young generation needs to hear, how God showed up and he was real. That's sharing faith, and there's too much at stake for you to not do that. For you that are older to not do that, for you pastors and leaders to not bring it out of your people. Now, here's my closing story. I was in Idaho, Boise, Idaho, several years ago now, and I was speaking to a group of older people themselves, and I get to meet so many neat people. And here's this guy, he was, 70 or so, serving in so many remarkable ways. And I said, what made you like this? How did you get like this? And he said, I used to sing this song with my granddaughter, and it went like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good girls go to heaven. When they get there, they will say, we love Jesus every day. And he said, one day, she was in the other room singing that song. I heard her. She said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good grandpas go to heaven. When they get there, they will say, golf, golf, golf every day. And I laughed. I thought that was it. But he was standing right in front of me. And he got very serious, and he looked me right in the eyes. And he said, Amy, I saw in that moment the kind of legacy that I was leaving. And it was not the legacy that I wanted to leave. And my grandsons, they play tennis. So I took up tennis. I started picking them up from school a couple days a week, and we'd go hit tennis balls. And that led to me doing some stuff with my young granddaughter, which led to me getting more involved in church with them, which led to me then beginning to serve at church and now serve outside the walls of the church. And his story is so much my heart's desire for people in the second half of life. We should desire to come alongside people and help them to walk this walk where they are going to leave a legacy and make a mark that lasts for eternity. That's what we are in the business of doing. And that's where we've got to invest ourselves. That guy got a new perspective, didn't he? He got a new perspective. And we may need to adjust some of our thinking and get a new perspective because there's too many people and too much potential for ministry and too much that God wants to do for us to ignore this. If there is any way I can serve you, I put out a newsletter a couple times a year, sometimes with young kids. I don't get it done, but I have a sign-up sheet for that. I have a book that lots of churches have used, Baby Boomers and Beyond. It's really got lots of church examples, kind of the nuts and bolts of ministry and this age group. But if I can come alongside you, I'd be happy to. Thank you.